Today we are going to talk about emerging adulthood. Before we dive in, take a couple minutes and think about yourselves and how the stage of emerging adulthood shapes you. Or if you were not a traditional student, how you think it might have been different. Have your priorities changed? Would you say your identity has changed? Has your status in society changed? Have your views of systems in society changed? There are a few theorists that had a large impact on emerging adulthood that we want to mention briefly. First is Erik Erikson. He was a developmental psychologist known for the theory of human development. He rarely mentioned age ranges in his theories, but did allude to the idea of a prolonged adolescence that was typical of industrialized societies. In psychosocial moratorium, which allows young adults many instances of identity development and experimentation to help find a niche in some part of society. Second is Daniel Levinson, a psychologist who focused on positive psychology. He developed an idea regarding what he called the novice phase of development, which was ages 17 to 33. During this phase, an individual goes through immense change and instability while working towards the goal of adulthood. And last is Kenneth Keniston, a social psychologist who expressed the idea of youth being a period of role experimentation between the stages of adolescence and young adulthood. The theorist who coined the term emerging adulthood was Jeffrey Arnett. Arnett received a bachelor's in psychology from Michigan State University and later a PhD in developmental psychology from the University of Virginia. His primary focus is based on research in emerging adulthood fields. He is the author of Emerging Adulthood, The Winding Road from the Late Teens Through the 20s, in which he goes further into depth about development during this stage. Arnett also has interests in media use in adolescence, especially music and advertising, and risk behavior in emerging adulthood. Currently, he is a psychology research professor at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. So, what is emerging adulthood? The focus is on developing individuals ages 18 to 25. The idea is that students aren't in the adolescent phase, but they aren't quite in adulthood in terms of stability, goals, maturity, or identity development. More specifically, they have left the dependency of adolescence, but have not yet entered the stage of typical responsibilities that are evident in adulthood. This period of life offers ample opportunity for identity exploration in areas regarding love, work, and worldviews. We will talk more in depth about this a little later. Love becomes more intimate and serious. An emerging adult begins to think about what kind of person they would like as a partner. Their work relates more to adult work roles and how jobs can lay groundwork for future jobs. And they begin to think about what type of work they are good at and like. Their worldviews are questioned and change from the worldview that they had at the start of college. Emerging adulthood is now a theory because of age delays in marriage, childbirth, and college attendance. Emerging adulthood is the only period of life in which nothing is normative demographically. The emerging adulthood stage is considered an in-between stage. During the adolescent stage, there is limited change when it comes to demographics. Up until the age of 18, most people live at home with one or more parent, are unmarried, do not have a child of their own, and are enrolled in school. Once they turn 30, they are generally married, have kids of their own, and have finished their education. Emerging adults tend to have a larger scope of possible activities because they are less likely to be controlled by role requirements or someone in authority. Their living situations are generally diverse, ranging from living at home, living in a university setting like a dorm or in Greek housing, or having a place of their own. While they have taken steps into adulthood living, they still rely somewhat on other adults for assistance. Many individuals in the emerging adulthood stage enter higher education curriculums after high school, though their education is often not completed in a linear way due to different situations, such as having to work. This group is also most likely to enroll in postgraduate education following their undergraduate degree. Many of those individuals in this developmental stage do not see themselves as adolescents, but also do not see themselves as fully adults. Only once they have reached the mid to late 20s and 30s do they feel they have reached adulthood. One would think that this group would struggle to see themselves as adults before they have established a stable residence, started and settled into a career, or committed to a long-term relationship. But surprisingly, these milestones are at the bottom of importance when it comes to attaining adulthood. What seems to rise to the top are individualistic qualities of character, specifically, accepting responsibility for oneself and making independent decisions, and becoming financially independent. The main focus when it comes to indicating that one has become an adult is that they are seen and feel self sufficient. While these two indicators are significant, parenthood is also seen as a large indicator to those that have their own child, and is seen as insignificant to those that do not. Emerging adulthood has exploration in three main areas: love, work, and worldviews. American adolescents generally start dating between the ages of 12 and 14. This dating is primarily recreational, consisting of one's want for companionship, the first experience of romance, and sexual experimentation. Generally, these relationships last anywhere from a few weeks to a month. Once an individual has reached emerging adulthood, their romantic relationships become more intimate and serious. Unlike adolescent dating, emerging adulthood dating generally has a focus on exploring physical and emotional intimacy, and is more likely to include sexual intercourse and cohabitation. In this developmental stage, work and career exploration becomes more serious and focused. Generally, in the adolescent stages, work enhances an individual's ability in time and money. Most adolescents work in service jobs. They tend to view their jobs in a way that does not prepare them for their occupation, but supports their active leisure life. Once an individual enters emerging adulthood, work experience becomes focused on preparation for their future career. In terms of education, they often explore various possibilities that would prepare them for the various jobs that they might obtain. This being said, they often switch educational paths frequently, including going to graduate school, where they can explore additional educational opportunities. Often students enter college with a worldview that was learned from a parental figure during childhood and adolescence. Once they enter college, they are exposed to a variety of different worldviews, and often by the end of their time in college, they have committed to themselves to a different worldview than the one they entered with and are still open to modifying it even more. These explorations are not always experienced as enjoyable. There is often disappointment, disillusionment, rejection, and failure. Additionally, these explorations are generally done on their own, without daily companionship. Individuals generally spend their leisure time alone. Nevertheless, they are extremely optimistic.
Who does this theory apply to? Arnett's theory largely applies to Western cultures, the biggest one being the United States. Industrialized countries and cultures tend to focus on postponing early marriages to obtain higher education, which is required by most information-based professions that are considered prestigious or lucrative. This allows for young people to explore their identities more in their late teens and early 20s. An exception, this can be seen with Mormons. Young Mormons are pressured to marry early and start having children, so this decreases their opportunities for identity exploration between the ages of 18 to 25. Overall, Arnett's theory is only applied to industrialized cultures, leaving out a large portion of the world. Schlegel and Berry make an interesting point in their research of emerging adulthood that only 20% of the non-Western cultures they studied had a period similar to emerging adulthood. So, this theory cannot really be applied to minority cultures. A lot of this has to do with minorities who are in a lower social class and who have a lower socioeconomic status rather than their ethnicity. Many young people in minority cultures do not have the resources or education to obtain a higher paying job. They are more focused on helping the family survive, which may mean working in labor-based jobs or not receiving an education in order to take care of siblings or parents. Going with the idea that social class is more influential than ethnicity, young people in middle to upper class have more opportunities for exploration compared to young people in the working class or below who have less opportunities for exploration. Arnett notes that this is not necessarily that opportunities are not fewer in the working class, but there is more emphasis on work explorations and less emphasis on education. These are possibilities to be investigated. Despite Arnett's theory being limited to mostly industrialized cultures, emerging adulthood is predicted to become more pervasive worldwide due to the increasing globalization of the world's economy. As globalization continues to spread, more and more cultures will start to see increases in higher paying jobs, as well as jobs that require young people to obtain higher education. Arnett believes that emerging adulthood could become a normative period by the end of the 21st century, though it will vary in length and content both within and between countries. While Jeffrey Arnett has some of the most groundbreaking research on emerging adulthood, I think it is important to consider both strengths and weaknesses. Starting with strengths, emerging adulthood theory allows for in-depth exploration of one's identity. Emerging adulthood is essential for many young people to truly figure out what they want in life and who they are. Because of this, young people are encouraged to continue to receive higher education in order to find their purpose or calling, in addition to learning more about themselves. These are two really great points within Arnett's theory. However, there are weaknesses to this theory as well. As mentioned previously, this theory really only focuses on industrialized cultures. This may improve in the future as globalization continues, but for the time being it is limited in who the theory applies to. In addition to this, cultural influences are not taken into account. Arnett's research focused more on social class and socioeconomic status, but didn't dive into how specific cultural influences could affect either the industrialized cultures or their minority cultures. Lastly, not everyone attending college is in the age range of 18 to 25 years old, the defined time period for emerging adulthood. We will discuss adult learners more in the upcoming slides. However, education and the emerging adulthood age range may not always line up. Here we deviate from identity development to learning styles or traditional learners, or those who identify as emerging adults and adult learners. For the purpose of this presentation, we identify adult learners as those between the ages of 25 and 50, have a high school diploma or a GED, are financially independent, and have 1 semester or less of college coursework experience. It is important to note that there isn't one theory for adult learning, but many theories on how adults learn. In 1833, Alexander Capp introduced the term andragogy, which are methods and principles used in adult education. This term came about because pedagogical models were more focused on education before adulthood and did not align with adult learning. Malcolm Knowles is credited with adopting the theory of andragogy in 1968. Later in life, Knowles questioned if andragogy was just for adults and if pedagogy was just for children. Between 1970 and 1980, he shifted towards a continuum model of teacher-directed learning versus student-directed learning. Here's a chart developed by Dr. Shamram Yazdani, highlighting the differences between the two methods. I would encourage you to revisit this chart after the next slide, which provides recommendations for andragogy theory to practice. Comparing adult learners to traditional learners, we find that there are many barriers and struggles for adult learners. Some adults may be low-skilled and due to changes in the industry, find themselves needing to learn new skills. Since they are entering higher education as adults, or re-entering, they may be more highly motivated than traditional learners. However, developments in technology, gaps in academic knowledge, institutional processes, how to be a college student 101, competition with other life responsibilities, such as family and work, and academic self-efficacy can provide some barriers. According to research from Susan O'Neill and Margareta Thompson, a student's self-esteem is particularly important because it is predictive of persistence in education, and it's likely to be from previous academic experiences. Carol Kasworm also finds that there are emotional challenges that can affect adult learners, including job loss or experiencing a life crisis. Some adult learners find themselves needing additional education based on job market demands after they have experienced job loss. Other students may find themselves pursuing education after a life crisis occurs, such as divorce, work issues, or financial stability. Carrie Kenner and Jason Wienerman posed that educators must understand where adult learners are coming from in order to create a curriculum that accommodates adult learning needs. Educators first need to have an awareness of the academic development gap that has occurred for adult learners. Adult learners have had life experiences that have ingrained tools and skills for practical knowledge that may not translate to skills needed to attain academic knowledge. College educators also need to frame the class content in a way that adult learners can see direct relevance to current life and/or career. Adult learners are goal-oriented, and if they don't see immediate value, it will lead to high rates of attrition. Breaking down complex assignments and presenting a clear step-by-step class syllabus can help frame the class for a goal-oriented adult learner. Lastly, through adult life experiences, learning strategies have been established that may not be conducive to academic learning. Kenner and Wienerman use the example of reading newspapers and popular novels, prior learning strategy for comprehension, and reading a textbook. Adult learners need to understand why and how this new metacognitive strategy will benefit them, and by repeating this learning strategy that competes with old learning strategies, they will eventually adopt a more academic learning style. Another hugely effective learning theory for adults is experiential learning, a theory developed by David A. Kolb. Knowles also agreed that adults learn best by doing, and they find task-oriented learning more relevant than lecture-style learning. So this ends our lecture on emerging adulthood. I now invite you to visit the discussion board and post your thoughts with the following questions in mind. Using the strengths and weaknesses of Arnett's theory, how can we apply those to working with students on a college campus? How could systems of oppression and/or privilege affect positive development during the emerging adulthood stage for minoritized groups of students? How are majoritized students continually benefited? And finally, traditional teaching practices in college focus on educating students who are within this emerging adulthood age range. As a student affairs professional, how would you alter your practices when working with non-traditional age students or adult learners? How would your methods differ to accommodate this group of students?